Hello and welcome to today's webcast from Range 4. I'm Helen Beale and today I'm delighted to welcome our colleague Jayne Groll from Florida. He's going to be talking with us about Certified Agile Service Management today. So Jayne, over to you.
Thanks, Helen, and hello everyone. Happy New Year, and thanks for spending some time with me today to learn a little bit about what an Agile Service Manager is and what Agile Service Management is. And I'm just going to take a few minutes today and go over part of the reasons why service management needs to be more agile and what the role of a Certified Agile Service Manager is, a little bit more about the course and the exam as well. So just to introduce myself, I am a board member of the DevOps Institute. I'll tell you a little bit more about the Institute towards the end of today's session. And also for the past 12 years, I've been president of ITSM Academy. So if you look at my credentials, my experiences both as a practitioner and as an educator have really spanned the service management and the agile DevOps space as well. So hopefully I bring a little bit of a broad perspective to today's webinar and also to this course. I am an instructor for several of the exams, including ITIL and Agile and DevOps. And I am sort of immodestly the author of the Agile Service Management Guide. So again, tell you a little bit more about that as we go through today's session. So let's start with the obvious question, and that is, what is Certified Agile Service Manager, or we like to call it CASM? So CASM was designed to provide the education that's needed to first understand what it means to be agile before you start to do agile. And in today's IT world, we know that when organizations say they are agile, they're really talking about doing agile software development or applying Scrum practices and processes to their development or product perspective. So they're starting to build sprints, and they're starting to look at backlogs and starting to operate in more of a frequent release iterative way. In CASM, in Certified Agile Service Manager, you will learn as much Scrum as you would in a Scrum Master class, but you're going to look at it from both the product and the process perspective. So understanding what product development in an agile world looks like, understanding how process can be designed to be more agile so that agile thinking and values are then instilled into service management. Service management, I'm sure as many of you know, is not only allocated to operations, but spans an entire service lifecycle. And so in order for it to stay relevant in a modern DevOps world, service management processes need to be able to adapt to frequent releases and a much more iterative approach. And then the second and primary goal of Certified Agile Service Manager, or CASM, is to create a role that becomes the operational counterpart to development Scrum Master. Scrum Master in that role has evolved very, very actively over the last 10 years, where more and more organizations are training their developers to be Scrum Masters, to understand the value of Scrum. I'm a Scrum Master, so really understanding that from a product development perspective, on the operation and on the service management side, having a counterpart role, a role that shares the same common vocabulary, that cross-pollinates between development, operations, service management, and other practices as well. So the Certified Agile Service Manager is the Scrum Master, but it's the Scrum Master looking at it from much more of an operational service management point of view. So if you look at some of the responsibilities of an Agile Service Manager, it is the individual that on the operational or service management side knows the most about ITIL and IT service management, as well as Agile and Scrum, and can piece that together into the service management program and cross the aisle into development, so that as development is starting to produce more frequent and smaller releases, the service management processes that support it can handle that as well. As I said, this role is the operational counterpart to development Scrum Master, but it's not the leader of the team. On the development side, the Scrum Master is not scoped to be the leader of the team as well. This person is a servant leader. So the goal is to provide whatever is necessary to help the service management and operational teams succeed, to protect the team, to remove impediments whenever it's possible so that the team can be successful and can produce either products or design processes in the timeliness and the ability for the organization to absorb as necessary. It is also a role very similar to Development Scrum Master that's going to keep the organization thinking agile. As I said in the previous slide, it is much more important to understand what it is to be agile than it is to do agile. And so both of these roles together help the organization instill agile thinking into their everyday practices and keeping all of the teams, whether the development or operational teams, focused so that the flow of work from development into operations and into production is as seamless as possible. And this role also facilitates Scrum events, and on the Agile Service Management side, the events that you might see in a development environment, events like a sprint or a sprint planning meeting or a sprint retrospective, if you have any experience with that, are the same on the operational side, perhaps in a slightly different context. So this role will facilitate those events, make sure they happen. The daily stand-up or the daily scrum still occurs on an operational basis, perhaps again in a different context, but it's equally important. So this role is a facilitator, it's a coach, it's a protector, but most importantly, it's a servant leader. So it's not a manager's role. It's in the truest sense of the word. And if anyone on today's webinar can think back to ITIL version 2, excuse me, in ITIL version 2, there was a very definite role in a service management program called an ITIL Service Manager. It was a very, very difficult course, a very difficult exam. And so by kind of recapturing the spirit of what what a service manager was, and then instilling agile thinking into it, it's really revitalizing the role that was a leadership role, that was a facilitation role, and a protector of the customer in the sense of whatever came out of development and flowed through operations ultimately was going to face the customer, and being able to meet customer needs in a timely manner became part of the obligations of this role. So why is CASM important? Well, we know that over the past, say, 10 years, development and operations have been working on improvement initiatives in parallel. So Dev has been focusing very heavily on becoming more agile by applying Scrum, looking at continuous delivery, continuous integration, really trying to improve their output, improve their flow of work, and being able to kind of break big projects down into smaller iterations. On the operational side, there's been a lot of emphasis on IT service management and ITIL. So looking at improving processes like change management or release management, incident management, problem management, trying to build configuration management systems. So really looking at focusing on how to be more efficient and more effective and producing quality services. The challenge is that these have been happening in parallel. And because Dev is Dev and Ops is Ops, we haven't really seen a crossing of the silos where the cross-pollination of the best of these practices has reached into the other group. And sometimes those groups are not in the same region, they're not in the same location. Excuse me, they may not even work for the same company. So that ability to have a common mentality and a common way of working has not necessarily been there. And so the individual achievements have not really delivered the full business value that they were intended. There certainly has been improvement, there certainly has been value, but it hasn't really spanned across the Dev and Ops spectrum. So CASM really does look to cross-pollinate agile and service management practices and development by being able to support an end-to-end agile service management approach, right? Service management underpins that entire service lifecycle. And so if we're going to have organizational agility, then there has to be some type of a reach into both development and operations where service management becomes important or supports development efforts, right? Stays relevant, becomes more relevant, And certainly what's happening on the product development side is very familiar, and that the flow of work will flow into operations much more smoothly. So we want to have devs start to look at managing services instead of managing products, and we want ops and IT service management. And you have to remember, IT service management is not a department, it's not a group, right? It's a series of processes that are executed by people, all different kinds of people. But if those processes are too complex, too bureaucratic, more than is what is actually needed based on the requirements of the organization, then it becomes something that becomes difficult for conformance. So in ops and IT service management, in agile service management, we're really looking at taking those processes and scaling them back to just enough. And how much is just enough will be unique to your organization, but starting an initiative that identifies how much is just enough is really a part of what CASM starts to deliver. The end result, the flow of work and the time to value will be vastly improved. And so a DevOps culture starts to arise because the knowledge transfer between multiple silos starts to become more common, starts to become more relevant to each other. Right now, the number of folks in operations that understand Scrum may be less than the number of developers that understand Scrum, and vice versa with service management, or you can look at any of the other practices as well. So we really do start to build proprietary practices and proprietary knowledge that kind of connects the dots between all of the different frameworks that are in use in an IT environment. It is really all about this. And if you've not yet seen the Agile Manifesto, I encourage you to go to agilemanifesto.org. It was written by a group of developers back in 2001. They got together to try to understand what was really important when it came to producing software for their customers. And while at first glance it may seem that the items on the right are not important, right, that we value the individuals and interactions in working software and customer collaboration and responding change way over process and tools, comprehensive documentation, contract negotiations, or following plan. What the manifesto is really saying is celebrate the items on the left and have just enough of the items on the right to make those items on the left amazing. Right? That concept of just enough really is a theme that carries through CASM, but is also a theme that carries through Agile. Right? Have just enough process and tools, and have just enough documentation, and have just enough contracts and service level agreements and operational level agreements, and have just enough plans. But don't celebrate the artifacts, celebrate the results. The artifacts are on the right, the results are on the left. So celebrate and focus on the results and use the artifacts as enablers in order to be able to get the results. So again, a good part of this course is understanding what it means to be agile, and this really sums it up. It is supported by 12 principles. If you go to agilemanifesto.org, you can see those principles. It kind of brings it a little bit further to life. But again, don't celebrate the artifacts, use the artifacts, and then celebrate the results. So agility is not just about Scrum, even though this course does teach an enormous amount of Scrum from both the product and the process perspective. There is a section of this course that's going to look at Kanban boards, or is going to look at Lean, and certainly looking at DevOps. That's the ultimate goal, is that development and operations have a faster flow of work between them, and introduces concepts such as continuous integration and continuous delivery, which on the service management and operational side may not be as familiar as it is to those on the development side. So certainly gives a nod to the fact that agility is not just about doing sprints. Agility means that there is a faster flow of work that allows more products and more process to get things done. Done is a big concept in Scrum as well. And at the end of the day, that's what we're celebrating. We're celebrating quality services that are done and available to the customers as and when they're needed. So just a little bit about the CASM course. So if you're interested in in exploring taking it or taking it yourselves. You'll understand how the course is built. First of all, from a who should attend, if you're interested in learning about Agile and Scrum from both the dev and the IT service management perspective, then I would encourage you to do this, because the course, as you'll see in the agenda coming up, really does teach as much Scrum as you would learn in a Scrum Master class. So it's going to teach Scrum in its purest perspective. In fact, the pre-reads for this course are both the official Scrum guide that were written as part of the Scrum Alliance and Scrum.org, and the Agile Service Management Guide, which doesn't strive to reinvent the Scrum Guide, but does look to bring that same type of thinking into service management. So again, you're going to learn as much Scrum as you would learn in a Scrum Master class, plus understand how to apply it in an IT service management or an operational perspective. If you're a process owner or a process designer, I absolutely would encourage you to do this. It does demonstrate some really kind of cool ways to manage process and to design it in increments so that you're rolling it out in the same pace that your organization can absorb it. If you're a developer who's interested in helping to make process more agile, you're frustrated by very complex processes that perhaps are not as enabling as you would like them to be, excuse me, then understanding more about Scrum and Agile from both a Dev and Ops perspective would certainly be helpful. If you're a manager who's looking to bridge multiple practices, in IT, we love our frameworks. We're probably the only business unit that really looks at different frameworks for different contexts, and putting all of those together into an IT framework is something that's often a bit of a challenge, and sometimes feels like one will supersede the other instead of complementing the other. So the course certainly does look to bridge those multiple practices into a DevOps environment. If you're a consultant and you're helping to guide your clients through process improvement and or DevOps initiatives, such as the services that Ranger 4 office offers, then certainly this course would be relevant to you as well. And then internal and external suppliers, if you're part of the value stream, then understanding agility and how to make the value stream more agile is certainly important as well. What will you learn? I've already said a couple of times, you really will get as much Scrum as in a Scrum Master class. In fact, if you were eligible to take the Scrum Master exam, you would pass it after taking this course. Unfortunately, there is a requirement that you take an actual Scrum Master class in order to do that. But you would pass the Scrum Master exam after taking this class. You would understand how to apply Agile and Scrum concepts, and they're not one and the same. You would understand how to apply them to service management, process design, and improvement. So it's taking the same approach that we take in software development, where you build in smaller increments and you build leveraging the power of the sprint, and you break your process down into meaningful chunks, and perhaps or perhaps not release that into your environment. So it really is looking at a very, very similar approach so that you can come up with minimum viable process the same way you might be looking at minimum viable product, and build forward from there. And as I've said, and I just can't emphasize this enough, this course really does emphasize that it is more important to be agile than to do agile or to do Scrum. Right? Scrum is a fantastic framework, right? Extreme programming, fantastic framework. Leveraging the power of a Kanban board, or looking at DevOps, or looking at automation, all fantastic. But you won't achieve the kind of success that you're looking to achieve if you don't have your people understanding and desiring the ability for them to have organizational agility, right? That just makes things move faster and they move much more smoothly. What your learners will not learn is ITSM concepts or processes. This course is not meant to contradict or reinvent anything that has already been defined in frameworks such as ITIL or Microsoft Operations Framework or COVID. Pick any of the service management frameworks out there. So we're not going to look at the definition of change management or incident management or problem management. There is not a prerequisite that you have foundational courses before it, but certainly an understanding of service management would be very helpful coming into this course. DevOps Foundation is also not a prerequisite for this course, and this course is not a prerequisite for DevOps Foundation. They really are standalone courses. So again, very important to understand that Agile Service Management does not reinvent service management. It helps to modernize service management so that it can stay relevant in a DevOps world. I like to say it's not your mother's service management anymore. So just looking at the course agenda, again, very, very high-level overview of how the course is built. And you can see on the first day, it is a 2-day class. The exam falls outside of these 2 days. Some organizations do it virtually over additional days. You really look at the first day, and it isn't until the end of the first day that you really start to get to Scrum. And all of day 2 focuses on Scrum roles and then how those translate into Agile Service Management roles and Scrum artifacts, the truest Scrum artifacts, right? Product backlogs, sprint backlogs, burn down charts from a very, very pure perspective, and then how do you apply that to Agile Service Management? So it really does waffle back and forth between what does it look like from its purest product development or software development context, and how do we take that same approach and apply it to process design and process improvement. The second half of the second day, Agile Process Improvement, understanding not only how to design Agile processes, but how to ensure that they stay Agile, and looking at continual service improvement as part of that, looking at technologies that can certainly underpin and support Agile Service Management, including technologies that your developers may already be using or you may be using that your developers could be using. So certainly looking at how we leverage the power of automation in a DevOps environment as well, and then some tips for getting started and an exam review. There is some homework. There's some really interesting discussions that occur in this class, and again, it's all intended to be able to look at Agile from an operational service management context, but also to understand what's happening in the development environment. About the exam, again, in many cases, you may take the exam in the class. You may be given a voucher to take the exam. I'll let Helen speak a little bit about the upcoming Range of 4 class. It is a requirement that you take the course, so you cannot take the exam without taking the course. There is a requirement that you complete at least 16 contact hours, 2 full days. You're probably going to do about 6 hours of personal study between reading the 2 guides and preparing. The exam is a multiple choice exam, 40 multiple choice questions. If you have any familiarity with Bloom's taxonomy, levels 1 and 2. Level 1 is knowledge, so you understand all of the concepts, what a sprint is, what a scrum is, daily scrum is, what a sprint retrospective is, what a product backlog is. So you understand the concepts. And then Bloom's 2 is you can take those concepts and put them into context, so you comprehend how those look in the real world. You don't apply it. You're not ready to necessarily do it, but you understand what it can look like in the real world. So Bloom's 1 is knowledge, Bloom's 2 is knowledge in context. The exam is 60 minutes. If English is not your primary language, then you're granted an extra 15 minutes, and 65% is passing. There is an exam requirements document that's that's included in the materials. And it actually does help you understand how the questions are weighted in each section of the course, and how many questions you can expect on each section. For example, not surprisingly, there are 12 out of 40 questions that are going to focus on Scrum from its very, very purest perspective, as if you were taking a Scrum Master exam. At the end, by the way, when you pass the exam, you are then designated by the DevOps Institute as a Certified Agile Service Manager, and you're entitled to use the acronym CASM as part of your credentials. So just to wrap up, I know that's kind of a very fast view of Certified Agile Service Manager, and I'm hoping that we have some questions about that. But just to introduce you to the DevOps Institute, if you're not already familiar with DOI. DOI was launched in early 2015, recognizing that DevOps as a framework or as an approach didn't really have an organization that was helping to identify what the standards are, what the emerging practices are, and we use emerging as opposed to best because DevOps practices are emerging from real organizations in real environments on an everyday basis. So really being able to capture what those emerging practices are, bring those to the enterprise, and then hopefully help the enterprise realize some of the benefits from building a DevOps environment. DOI has a board of regents that's composed of many people from the DevOps space. Helen is on our board of regents as well, working within the DevOps community, the IT service management community, the IT training market, really trying to identify what those emerging practices are and how an enterprise can learn more about those and put those into practice. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Helen and see if we have any questions.
Thanks, Jane. We do have a couple, but just before I go into them, Jane mentioned I was going to update you on the next CASM course in the UK that we're delivering. So that is scheduled for February the 2nd and 3rd at the Royal Exchange in London. It's £1,200 for the 2 days, including the courseware and the exam. So when we follow up from this webcast, we'll send you a link if you want to register for that. You did mention during the session, Jane, that the DevOps Foundation course and the CASM course aren't prerequisites to each other, but I have been asked about which course people should sit, and I guess it depends on kind of where they are on their journey. For me, I kind of see the DevOps Foundation coming first and this coming after, but I guess there are other instances where people might want to do them the other way around.
Absolutely. I don't think there's necessarily a right way to do it, but I would suggest that understanding first what DevOps is makes some sense. If we're going to instill agility across the DevOps spectrum, then understanding what DevOps is and how it's bringing benefit to organizations, and a little bit of what DevOps isn't, right, is included in DevOps Foundation. And then being able to look at, okay, let's look at what we're doing in our own environment. You know, Dev is doing Scrum and Ops has been focusing on IT service management, and how do we bring that together? Could be a next step, but intentionally left it as not making it a stepping stone to each other, because it really depends where in the journey an organization is and what sort of knowledge they need.
Thank you. Another question I have is about being able to do the course online. And at the moment, we are able to deliver it as a public schedule. Currently, we have that one in London that I just mentioned. We're able to come on site and do it with you and a group of your colleagues. We don't currently have it available online, but that will come through shortly. You did mention process owners during that presentation, Jane, as well. And I know that there is another course coming through from the DOI, the CAPO course, the Certified Agile Process Owner course. Could you just take a couple of minutes to tell us a little bit more about that and how it differs from this course?
Absolutely. So Certified Agile Process Owner, from a service management perspective, the definition of a process owner and what a process owner does and how a process owner manages a process has really been fairly absent. I mean, IDLE gives you a good definition. And if we're going to start to make service management more agile, then the role of the process owner, and again, all of the frameworks encourage that there be an accountable owner for every process, understanding what a process owner does and how a process owner can leverage some of the capabilities of Scrum and Agile. For example, a process backlog, the same way a product owner would manage a product backlog. And so really kind of drilling into the day-to-day life of a process owner and how to make that something that the process does have just enough capabilities and it does meet the requirements, not only of the customer, obviously that's the primary goal, but also to be able to improve that flow of work, and so that the process owner and the product owner can work together well. And that will be available probably mid Q1, so fairly shortly, I would think. And this is not a prerequisite. This is really a good general understanding of Agile Service Management, whereas CAPO, or Agile Process Owner, really does focus in on the role of the process owner.
And would you say, is that for a technical person, or we have a lot of instances where we have product owners that have come from the business? Is that a good course for those people to try and understand what the IT teams are doing from a development perspective?
I would think so. I would think that both CASM and CAPO, because it is emphasizing the need to be agile. And so whether you're doing business process management or IT service management, a process is a process, and a process owner is a process owner. So first of all, understanding what IT is doing, I think, is fantastic. But I also think that sometimes understanding how to manage a process, even if it's not in your context. And I'll give you an example of that, Helen. So I took Scrum Master, and it's hard for me to believe this, but it was 3 years ago, and kind of walked into that because I'm not a developer. Kind of walked into that concern that I wouldn't be able to relate to this approach, because it really is designed specifically for developers. So if anybody's taken a Scrum Master class, all of the exercises are development exercises, and they're not technical, but it really is meant to be relevant to a developer. And I will tell you that I had enormous epiphany, because I was able to listen to what the instructor was saying and then say, well, wait a minute, that could work in an operational perspective, or at the academy in a courseware development perspective. So it isn't necessarily for CAPO that you need to be an IT process owner. I think a business process owner would be able to kind of understand how that could relate in their world as well. So absolutely, I think it could work on a couple of different levels.
And one final question, will there be any other DevOps courses coming through in 2016 over and above the foundation course?
There are. We're actually looking at a couple of courses that'll be coming down in 2016. Continuous delivery is actively in the pipeline right now, and so there will be a continuous delivery course. I know you guys are looking at rugged DevOps, and at the end of 2015, we started scoping for a rugged DevOps course, and being able to take that forward as well. And there's a couple of others that I don't want to quite speak to yet, because we haven't really defined what that looks like, but those two will definitely come forward.
Great, I look forward to that. So with that, thank you everyone for your attendance today, and thank you, Jayne, for your excellent presentation. Look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great beginning to a great new year.
Thanks, and goodbye.
Take care.